This is server-side tracking done right with Stape, as you can see on your screen. This will be held by myself here. Quick introduction. I'm Dan, as you can see here. I'm a data tracking / measurement lead at Stape. I am joined here today by two of my colleagues who are going to be handle your questions in Q&A. These guys have not less, maybe more experience than myself, so you can absolutely trust their answers. Some of the Q&A, we'll have a short Q&A session at the end of the webinar where some questions will be answered live. And if your question, for whatever reason, is not covered, you can expect it to be in the materials that we're going to send as a follow-up after the webinar. Session outline for today is more of a draft, I would say. So we're having a bit of a unorthodox, I would say, webinar. So we're not going to speak about implementations specifically. We're not going to speak about particular platforms such as Shopify or particular destinations such as Google Ads and nuances of that reporting. Instead, what we're going to focus today on is Stape as a platform, Stape as a product, and the features that we offer to you to, well, make your life easier in some cases, in other cases to basically up your tracking game and improve your accuracy, attribution, and all of that goodness. So use cases, we're going to talk about Stape Store and user ID power-up. I'm going to show you what debugging options you have on Stape on top of just normal GTM preview. We're also going to touch about measuring the impact of server-side tracking with Stape Analytics. How do you read it? How you can present it to your customers maybe, and stuff like that. What you get after the webinar. You're going to get a full recording of this, so don't sweat it if you missed anything. Guides and templates, there will be some materials added to the send out as well. Q&A highlights, every single question that's going to be in the chat will be an Excel spreadsheet with an answer that we've provided, so you can get back to it and read it again. Live demo, right? People who've seen our webinars before are probably familiar with this, so I'm gonna close the presentation and let's go to Stape, I think. So I'm in my Stape account. This is a container that is already running. This is set up on a store called Shop Stape Agency, which is our test store. Again, people who visited previous webinars may have seen this already. Now, the way I want to structure this, I want to go from easier stuff to more complicated one. So we're gonna quickly run through a couple of power-ups, and then I'm gonna go through more complicated things with some examples, use cases, and such. So let me go here and start this. So we've gathered some statistics and some feedbacks and such. And by the way, I see a lot of partners in the chat right now, so shout out to you guys. We love you. And those statistics and feedback indicate to us that a lot of existing customers on Stape don't really use the power-ups to full extent, or maybe don't necessarily understand what they can provide and what are the benefits and why you would want to use them. So let's cross out a few very simple ones out of the way right now. The first one I'm going to cover is geo headers, right? Seems evident. It adds a bunch of headers to your requests that reach your server container. However, a lot of people somehow expect this to be, to do something automatic, or, you click a button and suddenly you're benefiting from it. I'm going to show you how it actually works. So we're going to go ahead and enable this on our container. You can read the description. There will be 5 headers added to every single request that we're going to receive. I'm going to save changes. Let my container redeploy. Take a couple of seconds. And this is how you actually interface with that data. This is my server container. By the way, the templates of the containers that we're going to use today will also be distributed, so you can expect to have the same situation if you want to play test it. I'm going to go ahead and just launch the preview mode. And let's trigger a few events on our website. Let it load first. The initial launch of preview may take some time because there's a new server being deployed specifically for preview purposes. So if you ever experience that, don't get alarmed or anything. This is quite normal. Now we're going to go to an example product such as this hat. Let's set it to cart, doesn't matter. And we are going to be looking at the incoming requests. For instance, here's our view item claimed by GE4 client here. This is a normal GTAG hit coming to our server. Where do we find those headers? Since they are headers, we need to look in the incoming HTTP request, which can be found here. You can expand this and look at the list of headers. And in here, you will find those geo headers we just discussed. This is me in Kiev, Ukraine, country, IP address, my postal code. This is actually correct, which is weird. Region 30 means nothing in our country. If it was like US, you would have a state here, right? So how do you use it and why would you want to use it? First and foremost, you need to grab that data because it's in the headers, so it's not in your event data, for instance. We will not find it here. Google Tag Manager has a native variable for that. It's called request headers. So let's go ahead and add one. I'm going to hit new, select the type, which is a request header. Let's call it something. I normally do this. And let's pick one for example. This would be, let's say, city. So I'm going to give it exactly that name, XGeoCity. Gonna call it the same way, just for my reference, and save it. Now, if we were to relaunch preview, since we applied some changes, again, let's refresh this page to trigger some events. You will find that now we actually have a variable responsible for this, and there you go. Request header GeoCity equals Kiev, so now you know where I am, right? Now, how would you use that data? Well, that's a question for you, really, right? You may have some regional regulations. You might want to filter, let's say, some lead form submissions that are coming from certain countries. So this just gives you an additional layer of data which you can utilize to make your decisions in tracking. A very common example of how people use this is they start sending this as user data to Facebook to bump their match score in the event manager. Well, to tell you the truth, that's not breaking things. That's like legitimate. On the other hand, that doesn't make much sense to me because what happens is you're sending the geo data inferred from the IP address. I can assure you that Meta, Facebook can do it on their own. And when they ask you to send country, city, and such, they expect it to be user provided data, not data inferred from IP. So on one hand, you have artificially increased your match score on any given event. On the other hand, in the background, nothing of substance, nothing of benefit is really happening on Meta. So keep that in mind. This is a common, well, like I said, I shouldn't call it an error, but this is a common occurrence across our user base, and that that is not entirely proper. Like I said, that might not have the effect you're seeing. The artificial change in the number, in the numeric value of your match score doesn't indicate that there's necessarily better matching if you're supplying like faulty data. So yeah, geo headers out of the way. That was a quick one. Now let's go back to our power-ups and look at the next one. The sGTM preview header configuration. So real quick, when you're debugging, when you're running the preview mode in your server GTM, I'm receiving these requests right now without web preview simply because I have this open in Chrome in the neighboring tab and Google is able to stitch, things together. If I were to send some requests from outside, let's say from it would be a webhook from my CRM or some automation hit from Zapier or whatever it is, if this call originates not from my browser when I run my preview session, in order for those requests to actually surface and be displayed in your preview session, they need to be stitched by what's called a preview header. So in your preview mode in server container, you can go to send requests manually, and it will give you this value, XGTM server preview HTTP header. You want to copy this and plug it into this power up. Let's do just that. It's going to say performance can be impacted and everything. What it means is that if you're doing this on a live container, every single live request, debug or not, the system will attempt to display it in your specific preview session. So be careful with that. You might burn your computer down if we're talking about large traffic and everything and you're doing this in live environment. So normally you want to use this power up on, pre-deploy sort of situation, testing some events that are not happening live, testing on containers that are not happening live. This is only the one route, which is like very convenient because it affects all requests. But for those of you who are a little bit more tech savvy, if you're using like Postman or you're controlling the payloads of your webhooks, you can assign this header manually to your requests without using this power up. making it so that only that single request you've chosen ends up in your preview session, right? Without affecting all of the live traffic. So that's preview header for you. It's not a most common of cases, but now there is such a functionality and you can use it. So let's save changes. Let's close it up. I don't need that preview header. The container will redeploy. And yeah, and we can go back to our power-ups. Now, with the easiest stuff out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about the custom loader, which is the first power-up for a reason. It's the only one that has a recommended label here. And again, there's a lot of reasons for that. So let's break it down into things. First and foremost, what custom loader lets you do, let's go and configure it, is you can obviously use your subdomain to download your GTM container, your web GTM container. I'm using Shopify here, so the system suggests just to use the app, which we're going to switch to. So what it does, let's do other real quick, just to give you a demo. And I'm not going to use original GTM code, apologies. Let's do this. Let's do this for now. Disregard this, I'm going to talk about Cookie Keeper in a second. So this is the code. What it does, it replaces the domain that you're downloading your web container from. It also masks some things such as the file name instead of GTM.js. Essentially, the bottom line of this is this gives you resistance to ad blockers. And I want to stress this out. By default, custom loader, the only thing that it does is it ensures that your container, web container, is successfully loaded in a ad blocker environment, right? It has no um, again, by default, let's forget Cookie Keeper, it has no influence on the cookies. You can have a native loader and still send stuff to your server container via your own custom subdomain and still benefit from the cookies being set from the server and such. Custom loader on its own affects ad blocker prevention. And I'm going to demonstrate it to you real quick. Let's do a few things. So I have an ad blocker here. You can see this is uBlock, this is turned on. There's no specific filters or anything. Let's do this. Let's go to our Shopify. I'm going to find our Stape app here. Oh, I'm searching in orders. Apologies. I'm going to go apps, Stape server GTM. And let's say I don't want to add custom domain. I don't want to add custom loader. And just save this. Data saved. Beautiful. And if we go to our website and we look into the network to see what's going on, I have a filter for ss dot, which is our subdomain. So assuming the loader has been updated back to the normal one. Oh, we can actually search by GTM. Right. This is a redirect because it was downloaded. Okay. As usual, things go wrong in a demo. Let's close this up. Let's do this again. Make sure. Okay. Let's hit refresh again. And let's see if there's any requests going to our subdomain. You can see there's none. Because if we go through the stuff that was blocked here, we will find that GTM, GTag, and all of that was actually blocked. Now, let's switch to the custom loader real quick. Back again, add custom loader, add custom domain, save it all up. There will be cache, so give it a few seconds, and you can see there's already our custom loader being downloaded beautifully with, bypassing the ad blocker. What still happens though is that G4, and you can see it here, there's an attempt to download GTag, is being blocked. So despite the fact that we've that we've ensured that our container is being downloaded, the Google Analytics is still being blocked and recognized by the ad blocker. So what we've released just recently, and this might be news to some of you, is this toggle, which is G4 ad block bypass. I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to hit generate. Now, if we wait a couple of seconds, and we have to, because cache and everything, you will see that this request will actually not be blocked. In order for that to occur, the container needs to redeploy. So let's give it some time. Probably a couple of seconds. And then we can look into this and see our analytics not being blocked. But again, let's give it some time. while we're waiting, right? Like I told you, so cut. Oh, it's verifying right now. Okay, so we're gonna see it in a second. So like I told you, by default, if you're not using Cookie Keeper, which I'm going to switch to in a second, your custom loader just ensures that you're bypassing ad blockers. It does nothing else. So our suggestion would be to use it, obviously, because that would improve the amount of signal any of your destinations receive, ultimately meaning better attribution, better, return on ad spend and things like that. Let's do another test real quick. And there you go. This request, which you probably will not recognize because it has no indication that this is Google Analytics, is actually our Google Analytics head, which bypassed the ad blocker, which I have turned on. There's another head here going to our subdomain, which is also a GA4 head, fully encoded, fully masked from outside observers. So these requests will actually go through uBlock, AdBlock, whatever you attempt there. That's the custom loader. Okay. Now, Cookie Keeper, why you probably care about it, why you wanna, why you wanna have anything to do with it. I'm going to switch to some visual aid I've prepared here, which is my simple breakdown of the first party cookie. I want to stress out this is first party cookie. We're not talking about third party cookies. They are of no interest to us, but we need to understand that there's types of first party cookies, unfortunately, right? So first and foremost, you can set a first party cookie with JavaScript, and this will work, assuming your JavaScript wasn't blocked, assuming it's not, a known tracker or anything like that. JavaScript cookie will live up to 7 days in Safari. I have a wildcard, an asterisk there for the 7 days. This means 7 days of browser usage, right? You can go to, like, if you're not opening your Safari for 7 days and you open it on day 8, that internally would mean day 2, and your cookie will live for the next 5. So this is a bit complicated. It doesn't have anything to do with the cookie lifetime that you see in your browser. These are internal timers that Safari introduced as part of ITP 2.0, ITP 2.2, and well, some other versions of that. Now, if you just use server-side GTM by default, I mean with your custom domain, you pretty much end up in a very similar situation. Your cookies are more resistant to being set in the first place because they don't rely on any JavaScript to be downloaded. And the one they do, such as GTM, we've already, protected from our ad blockers. Still, in Safari, they will live up to 7 days through the same algorithm that I just described to you. Because Safari has another layer of check, another layer of validation, which essentially checks if your server container, your subdomain rather, lives in the same network as the website where we're setting the cookies. And if there's a mismatch, it doesn't treat the first party cookie as, well, quote unquote, true first party cookie, and it will still set an internal timer for 7 days. So the next in line is using sGTM plus Cookie Keeper. Actually, let's talk about the last one first. sGTM, same IP range, right? So if your subdomain, so your server container, lives in the same network as your website, Safari will treat the cookies as real first-party cookies without any additional limitation, and their lifetimes will be such as you set them. In order to achieve this, there's two ways. You can use a CDN, essentially proxying all of your traffic, so the website and the tracking traffic through Cloudflare or any other CDN out there, technically ensuring that they are in the same network so the cookies are set correctly. Another option for this is if you have access to a load balancer or the web server that's running your website, you can achieve it with those tools as well. If what I just mentioned sounds too complicated to you, too techy, or anything like that, you want to go for sGTM plus Cookie Keeper because that will not require any additional development on your part. It's not as good as being in the same IP range, but it's like very close to that. The way Cookie Keeper works is essentially externalizes the cookie storage. We keep the cookies of the user in the database and we keep on collecting and restoring them. In practice, this means in Safari, there's no lifetime limitation for the cookies, right? Because at any given point in time, they will be restored, so set anew. So their lifetime internal timer will default to 7 days on any given day. And this is why, going back to the power ups, this is why most of the time you want to use the Cookie Keeper, especially especially if you're using one of our apps to embed GTM. So if you're on Shopify, if you're on WordPress, Magento, Wix, PrestaShop, BigCommerce, any of that, we have our integrations there. They will help you add a data layer to those shops. They will embed the container on site with the custom loader and everything. And they will provide dependency for the cookie keeper as well. So if you're on those platforms, no brainer, use it at all times. If you're not on those platforms, there's a complicated route with a custom cookie to be requested from your developers. That's all listed in our documentation. I don't want to waste your time on that. What you can do if you don't have that, don't have access to the developers, don't have a custom cookie, don't have anything of that, you can use the user ID power up, which is here. You can think of user ID power up as kind of a light fingerprinting. It's dependent, it's tied, like the unique ID it generates is tied to a browser, to user IP, so user agent, so user browser, user IP address, so his network, TLS settings of the browser, and the host name in question. So long as I'm on the same laptop from, I don't know, my office or my home, this user ID will be persistent. Why I'm bringing this up is you can use it as a master in your cookie keeper. So you can say that for the identification, I'm going to use Stape user ID and just generate a loader like that. Assuming you have a custom website, you would copy this, embed into your website, and stitching by the user ID, we would be restoring the cookies. The list of cookies is here, by the way. You can configure that. You can also add some custom ones if you're on a business plan or higher. So there's some flexibility available for you. Switching back to my visual aid, like I said, this is your default situation. Line number 2 is your default situation. You want to go further? Ideally, you want to go for this sGTM in the same IP range. If your resources, your know-how, your situation doesn't allow for it, like for instance, this is impossible on Shopify because Shopify has uh, reserved IP addresses and everything. You can't really do it. They have a deal with Cloudflare. You need to opt out for Cookie Keeper, which is the next best thing if you're concerned about cookie lifetime and things like that. Okay, I think that concludes the cookie keeper part and some of the lesser power-ups. I think I can take a few questions live right now if we want, just since on the since we're on the topic. So anything about cookie keeper, custom loader, or anything like that, throw it at me. Let me actually open Q&A 1 second. Are there any advantages of using Stape.io global CDN if my DNS already using CDN? No, there's no advantages to that. If you're already using CDN and your subdomain sits behind this the content distribution network, then there's no point in using ours. The idea behind ours is an easy way for you to download your container a little bit faster. Right. Something else. What is the most common webhook use case, and does it find its place in tracking for such platforms as Meta, which allow you attribute conversion without client ID cookies? Absolutely, yes. The most common webhook use cases would be data from your CRM, so conversions that happen down your funnel offline without any interaction with the website, and they go through your business process in your CRM. You can push them back to your server container to then report them to Meta, Google Ads, whatever you choose. Does it need client ID cookies? Well, that's a deeper subject. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Depends on your situation, depends on the destination, and what's happening in general. But yes, webhooks absolutely have a merit, pretty much for any tracking destination you can envision. Where can I find the development instructions to deploy a master cookie to work with a cookie keeper with a custom website? It's in the article that we're going to link and also include in the materials that we're going to distribute. Right. I think have things to speak about, so I'm going to switch back, and guys will take care about your questions in text. Right. The next big subject we have is Stape Store. This is our bride, if you will. This is it. What it is an alternative to Firestore. It's essentially a hot storage. It's a persistent database that is included into your container. On Stape, it's like automatically connected and everything. You don't need to do any authentication or such things. You can just use our variables and tag, and they will communicate with this database. There's a ton of use cases for that, and I imagine people in the chat have some of their own. I'm going to talk about the most, well, exciting, I think, one. At least this is very trendy, right? And this is profit over ad spend. So reporting not values, but margins to, let's say, your Google Ads or any other destination, so that the metrics those ads cabinets give you indicate your profit rather than revenue. Quick hint, any profit over ad spend implementation requires a lot of effort from the customer side anyway. So a lot of this is not technical. A lot of this is making sure you provide your margins correctly. You always update them and they're available for all of your inventory for this to work. So I've created a few documents here. For example, POS example 1, example 2, example 3. As you can see inside, I have an item ID field and I have a margin field. Item ID is a string, margin is a number. I have ones just for the simplicity of calculation here, and these item IDs are my hat, jeans, and a t-shirt. So what we're going to do is, assuming we already have our database of margins here, we're going to set it up, and I'm going to show you how you can report profit on your ad spend rather than the revenue, right? Let's close the preview and go to our server container. So let's break it down essentially into components. What normally happens is we have our purchase event, a conversion happens, and we receive an items array through our GE4. That has a list of products with their quantities, with their item IDs, and with their prices. What we want to do is we want to calculate the margin of all of those products and report that as a value to, let's say, our Google Ads rather than the revenue of the conversion. So this is easily done. Let's quickly create a folder. I'm going to call it POAS, like this. Sorry, fat fingers. Okay, what I'm gonna do next, I'm going to create a new variable, and we're gonna go to gallery and look for what's called the margin lookup. Obviously delivered to you by Stape. Stape Store margin lookup, right? I'm gonna add it to my workspace. Edit here. GTM will be GTM, not gonna let me do it, so let's let's create a new variable again. Stape Store margin lookup. Let's call it something like margin lookup. And we have very little settings here. Field containing product ID in your Stape Store. As we discussed, this is item ID for simplicity, so I'm just gonna say item ID. This is the key in the Stape Store, which the variable will be looking for to define the item ID and match it to your product. Field containing margin value, again, we called it margin for simplicity. There's a selector. Variable will look for standard items array, so G4 format, which I believe everyone here uses. And we want to select which ID we're going to use for matching. Is it ID, SKU, variant? I'm going to use ID. I'm going to also hit this, store responses in cache. This will save you some requests. If you do similar queries, the variable might try and return it from cache rather than going to store and generate another request. So this is the configuration. This is all I had to do. We now have that variable created. So let's launch preview. And let's just make a purchase. I'm going to go to our store. I have a cart here. There's too many hats. So let's do one of each, right? And our expected result here is our margin on them is 3 because, well, that's what I put into the database. Let's add a t-shirt. Now we have 3 products in our cart. I'm going to go to checkout. Real quick, check that there's events coming in. Yes, beautiful. So give it some data here. I'm obviously not in Montana, so put something like this. This is a test store, so the cart number will be 1. 26, doesn't matter, something like this. Right, and we can purchase. Thank you, Dan. Thank you. All right, here's our purchase event, which came in. There's 2 of them, one through the data tag, one through the GE4. Let's look at the GE4 for simplicity. And if we look at the variables, our margin lookup equals 3. Let's break it down real quick. Here's our items array that came in. We have one quantity of this item. We have one quantity of this item, one quantity of this item. The variable has gone to your Stape Store. We can look at the request here. because it was returned from cache. Well, anyway, it has went to your Stape Store, found the match, found all the documents containing relevant IDs, found their margins, multiplied them by the quantity in the array, and has returned to you this value of 3. So the last thing we want to do is we want to plug in that margin into some of our reporting, right? And I think the simplest way, let's assume we're doing this for Google Ads, is we would just, explicitly give it the value like this. If you were to do that, now you're reporting your margins to Google Ads or any other destination. Obviously, you can plug it into Facebook or any other tag you have. And now you have that cool feature, which there's entire businesses built around and they charge you money for it. So there you go. This is a pretty good, I think, example of the usage of the Stape Store, but there's ton of others. You can store user data here for further usage, right? You can, for instance, a common case which we do is we ensure there's no duplicate transactions being reported. So we store the transactions that have been reported, and when we're attempting to report a new one, we're going to check if that may have already occurred, therefore not sending double the signal to any destination. And there's endless cases you can come up with. They will be specific to your situation and what you're trying to do there. So yes, this is Stape Store for you. Just real quick, because I haven't shown that margin lookup, which I showed to you, was a very specific case. Obviously, you have like, let's say, agnostic cases. So if you go to gallery of tags, you will find the writer tag, which is Stape Store writer, which obviously lets you put things into the store off of your event data or anything. And if you go to variables, there's a generic Stape Store lookup variable, right, which is not built around margin, but just will let you pick up specific whatever from your storage on based on document key, based on field values, anything you want to do with that. Right. And this does it for the Stape Store. We also have talked about user ID. So now I want to switch to logs, and that's exciting. So normally, sorry, stuck. So logs. Normally, the way you debug it, right? You have your preview sessions in your GTM, and you debug things in real time. You're trying to catch some errors and understand what's going on. That might not be enough in some cases, especially if we're talking about large traffic, large volume of events, maybe some events that are not that easy to trigger, which are buried deep down in the funnels, and well, another convoluted cases. So what we can do is we can log things, and Stape has provided you with that. We retain our logs up to 10 days. By default, we only store what's called access logs, which is right in front of me. These will be stripped of PII. This will be stripped of cookies or anything sensitive, really. You can see there's our calls to Stape Store logged. You can see there's our debug session in GTM, script download, which would be a GTM container being loaded. Here's our purchase event, for instance. But like I said, this will not tell you much. This just indicates that something has occurred. It doesn't have any useful information for you. This is the access log, which, like I said, we collect by default. These logs are the basis of how your subscription thresholds are calculated. So there you go. But in order to actually expand your debugging capabilities, there's request and response logs. Request and response logs are just that. Request logs what your tag has sent to a destination. Response is logging what destination has replied back to you. Request and response logs have to be enabled. This is your decision to store and log that data. We don't do it by default. We can't do it by default. The way you do it is in any server-side template authored by Stape, such as this Facebook here. You can go to any tag, you can go to log settings, and you can say always log to console, right? So do not log ever, log to console during debug and preview. This is debug and preview, and always log to console. So if you do that, and we publish, each time this Facebook view content tag fires, the payload it's sending out will be logged, and the response that Facebook returns will be sent out. This is massively useful when you're trying to, when you're arguing with Facebook about your attribution, or you need to empirically show your customers that the reporting is not actually broken. Maybe there's some issues elsewhere. And yeah, so just to give you an example and just also some insight into how that works. Real quick, let's look at some event. Here's the page view, for instance. This is the console in question, right? This is the, when we say log to console, this console is being written to, and these are the logs that you are going to ultimately see. So in your preview mode, you can already kind of have an idea how those logs are going to look. This is our request log and the payload we've sent. This is our response log. It has an error because I don't have a conversion API token, so there's a bunch of binary data here. Never mind. But if we were to look on it, log side, let's say response log, let's say Facebook for today. Let it search. It's doing a lot of work in the background. You also want to limit your searches as much as possible to reduce cardinality, if that word means anything to you. So like give it as much input as you can. And here's our response logs. Like I said, it's all 400 because, surprise, I don't have any conversion API token. Let's double check that real quick. If we look here, settings, yeah, our meta API token is put your value here, hence the 400s. But it kind of shows you what you can do with this. So you can see there's 400s in your Facebook reporting. You can open them up. Stape will stitch together the access log, which, you know, trigger this event, the request logs, which are associated with this event. So if you have multiple tags, it's not only Facebook that's going to be here, and the response logs, of course. So in here, is my full page view tag firing. I have sent a page view event, there's my user agent, there's my IP address, there's my browser ID, my hashed user data, you know, event source URL and everything. So you can literally debug what has been sent. And here's response from Facebook. Like I mentioned already, it's 400, but in a normal situation, you have 200 OK events received and everything is beautiful. And so you can use this to debug things heavily. There's also a type of entity here called other logs. Other logs are generated by our logger tag. That's another addition on top of your kind of armory, let's call it. So we want to go to templates first. Let's add a new, apologies, not client. Let's add a new tag. Search in the gallery, and you want to go for logger. Logger by Stape.io. This is essentially a tag that lets you do custom logs, however you need them for whichever purposes you may have. So let's create one. I'll do logger. I'll give it a trigger as usual. Let's say I want to log purchases. Always log, give it some custom event name. I don't know, my custom log. You might want to do log all event data. So maybe log all of this. You can do custom data. So you can assign something. Let's say if the conditions for your log fire, you want to say, I don't know, constant or something. So you can add any sort of parameters to do that logging, and they will end up in these other logs, where you will search for them by the event type, and it will have the entire breakdown of the data that you've added to it. Again, expanding your debugging sort of capacity, you can find specific errors, like for instance, let's go to our Facebook responses just to give you a quick example. Let's do 400. Let's say my request to Facebook or any other destination fail, right? And it's evident that something is wrong, there's not enough events and such. You can go here and you can look for the explicit reason for that, right? But like I said, I'll give it a second for it to load, but we can look at that 400 and we can look inside the response log and understand the actual reason of why it was a 400. In my particular case, there's a response body that says error, invalid access token, cannot parse access token. This is because I have a gibberish one. Your other errors might be, hey, content IDs or something is not structured properly. There's a faulty payload, and then gives you a clear indication of what's going on, and you can go ahead and fix it. Fix it, preview, test it real quick, and be happy. Now, there's even more. So we have a feature that is tied to the logs, which is called monitoring. And you can create alerts based on those logs. So assuming you have some logging enabled, you can sleep better, I hope, by having this. So let's create a few and give you just some examples. one of the most common ones, we want to say, hey, I just want to make sure that my container is actually up and running. So let's say, I don't know, generic traffic warning, which might not be the best wording for it, but hey. So we're going to tie it to access logs. We're going to say all domains, because, well, this is tied to a container, and I want to check it once every hour. And once every hour, if the client, which is GE4, has less than 0 events, like less than 0, less than 1, sorry, apologies, less than 1 occurrence, right? Or maybe let's do less than 10 or whatever, which also might be an indication of a problem. And I save that alert. The moment that happens, we have our settings here, my account owner will receive a notification. You can add somebody else, like a friend, and they will see this notification as well, which would be an indicator for you that, hey, potentially something is wrong with something is wrong with your container. Maybe it dropped down, maybe there's no traffic, maybe somebody screwed something up with a website update or anything like that. You can of course do some custom alerts, right? You can be more granular. Let's say purchases. Let's say your average purchase count per day, and if it drops down, you're you're alarmed, and yeah. So we're gonna say purchase log type access logs client equals G4. We also want to say event matches exactly purchase, and let's say it's less than 20 over, I don't know, 1 day. Again, you will probably have your numbers, of course, and we save this, and now the system will shut out if this actually occurs. So if it does a check on the break of the day, and for the past 24 hours or 12 hours we've put here, it doesn't matter, there's less than 20 purchases, it will raise an alarm, which means you have to probably look into it, see what's going on, and potentially take some action. So these are logs and monitoring for you. I'm going to switch to my last subject, and we're going to use the remainder of the time for some Q&A. Last subject would be Stape Analytics. And mind you guys, this is in beta. You might see some funky behavior at times. And I also want to warn you, this one I'm going to show you is on a test store, which is password protected. So there's not too much traffic going on here, and not much flashy things to show you. But in general, what it does, the Google Analytics will break down some stats for you. You're gonna have total amount of requests received by your container. You can select the period, 10, 30, and 90. And it will give you the statistics of how many of those recovered from ad blockers. So if you have a custom loader and there's people visiting your website with the ad blocker, and we're bypassing that with all of the goodness that I showed you today, you will see that metric. You will be able to tell your stakeholders or whoever your customers that, hey, this actually has, collected that many events, which otherwise would be completely lost. The second metric is recovered from tracking prevention. And by tracking prevention, we obviously mean tracking prevention in Safari, Mozilla, and, ITP copycats. So this will essentially mean more or less the percentage of your of the requests received from Safari and such. There's some breakdowns for you. You have total of specific events like add to carts, page view, purchase. These are GE4 requests. There's a separate method for data client requests for those who use it as well. I have less events here because I'm just sending less type of stuff. Other requests would be, again, your debug, storage, which is Stape Store, other, just a lot of things that get dumped to that category. There's like some set cookie request and such. I don't think you should dwell too much on it, but this gives you a general breakdown of what's happening in your analytics. And I think, in your container. And I think the most useful part is actually this one, because this is what you're looking for. This directly and empirically shows you the impact that using server-side tracking and Stape, server-side tracking in general, and Stape in particular, has brought to your reporting, how much of an uplift it has done. And yeah, there's some other stats here. Analytics are just turned on Stape side. They do not require to, again, change loaders or anything. So you can turn this on for your existing customers already. It will need some time to aggregate the data to show you. But yeah, and hopefully that will be useful for you. I think I'm out of things to talk, so I'm gonna stop sharing the screen and open Q&A and do something there. Okay, open 7 questions. You hope you speak about Google Tag Gateways. Well, if we have the time, let's answer more particular questions on the matter, but I'll definitely will try to address that as well. Is it possible to use BigQuery API to export all G4 request data? Additionally, can it handle high traffic volumes effectively? Uh, so you have two ways. There's a native GE4 export, right, which you can just connect your property side. It's subject to limits and everything. The second way is in your server GTM, there's a tag in a gallery called write to BigQuery, which you can just use to dump any data you want off of any request that you want, right? It will only require a service account uploaded to your container on Stape, your Google service account, to give you access to BigQuery. And that's it. You would just write to it as a normal, as any other tag. Like it's no difference from Facebook or anything like that. So there you go. Yeah, absolutely, you can do it. Can it handle high traffic volumes effectively? Well, it can handle all the traffic your sGTM is already handling. There's no difference. About logs, my Google Ads offline tag after the last update, and the logs show all events as undefined other, but I'm sending it. Well, that is because most likely those events of yours, they are conversions, right? Like they are not. We don't know the specific type of event you're sending, if that's what you mean. But if you're saying that all of your Google, like you can't find your logs under Google offline tag in the search, that might be a problem. I'm gonna pass it over to the developers. We'll take a look. Might just be a bug if I understood you correctly. Shouldn't be the case. You should be seeing them under Google offline events, of course. Any benefits from using gateways over sGTM? If there aren't any, what benefits do you lose when you use gateways over sGTM? The biggest benefit you're losing, the biggest benefit of sGTM is explicit control. You transparently and explicitly decide what it is you're sending. You can debug every single request, every single data point. You can look at it, understand it, pause it, remove it, you know, supplement it, enrich it, whatever. With gateways, their idea is you don't need all of that. It's just like you know, it's all done automatically for you. It's too much hustle. It just works and you're happy about it. So if you don't need that granularity, you can go with the gateways, I think. Alex, is it possible to create a guide on blog for this? You can take a value. Alex, is it possible? I mean, I think I'm gonna answer to you in text. I copied the new custom loader script with the G4 add block bypass and the GTM routed the bug. I don't see the G4 and G tags anymore. This is normal, Gabriel, and the reason for that, if you recall what I showed you, those requests start being encoded. They are not G4 requests to an outside observer. They are not G4 requests to, let's say, Omnibug or whatever kind of extension you're going to use. That's the entire sort of purpose, right? That's the entire sense of it, is to have them not be recognizable. So those ad blockers out there don't pick up on them. If you want to debug those events, just launch preview and see your tags firing, look into payloads, and that should be good enough, I think. After setting up consent, my GE4 data took an unexpected hit. Roughly only 6-ish of traffic is being attributed to a source medium. However, my ad platform seems to still track and attribute events at a pretty high rate, even when my GE4 can attribute it to a source. Why is that the ad platforms are able to still track and attribute events to themselves as sources, but GE4 can? Well, most likely, I would say maybe there's some faults in your implementation, but technically, the answer is this: when when an ads platform, let's say Facebook or Google Ads, if you do a direct reporting, attributes a conversion, it's attributed as based on the click ID, or in some cases based on the user data. The way your GE4 attributes purchases is based on UTMs and such of the initial of the first touch of the session that that generate this conversion. So if that information on the first touch on lending, which very likely may be tied to your consent situation, gets lost or dropped or like becomes faulty in any sort of way, ultimately that means that the conversion at the end of your funnel by GE4 specifically might not be attributed to a proper channel, although in parallel you've reported it to, say, Google Ads with a click ID, and it attributed like that because, well, click ID. Does the GA4 add block bypass encode the payload? Yes, it does, sir. You don't need to handle it. You can test it real quick, and your server container will be receiving decoded normal requests as you expect them. So there's no additional kind of action for you to take. It's all handled automatically. Is there anything else? Can we use the user ID power up for user ID tracking in Google Analytics? Oh, well, I mean, you can. You should be very, very cautious about it, though. And the reason for that is, like I told you, you have to understand the limitations of that power up. If I change a device, if I change a network on an existing device, so I sit here with you on my laptop on Wi-Fi and I switch to, I don't know, cell, I suddenly have a different user ID. So there will be a lot of, it's not consistent enough, I think, to use as a user ID in GE4. It's better, like the user ID ideally should be an actual uh, persistent user ID tied to a logged in user. So whichever device I log in from, I have the same user ID. That being said, you can play with it. You just need to understand that limitation, right? You just need to set your expectations correct because it's not going to be, persistent 100% of the time. People change devices, people change networks, they go to restaurants, I don't know, gas stations, whatever. What could be the cause of high unassigned traffic with server implementation? Well, guys are typing an answer to that. We have a few articles specifically on that topic. I mean, again, I'm not going to entertain it right now. There's definitely solutions out there for you. Can we use, okay, we talked about that. Does it make sense to use cookie extender tag if you use cookie keeper? No, doesn't make sense. Cookie extender is, it's kind of a old development. The idea behind cookie extender is to extend cookie lifetime of specific cookies compared to how they are set normally. Doesn't really make much sense if you're using cookie keeper because, like I said, the lifetime will essentially be recycled at any given point in time. Cookie keeper will restore them to the default, which is 7 days. So you don't really care about whatever Safari says in the cookie lifetime box. Hi Dan, switch my G4 server side, and after that I'm seeing a consistent 10-15% of not set source medium. My setup server with payment gateway webhooks, and also use Firestore database to enrich the server parameters. I debug everything and it appears that my implementation is nearly correct. Need some debugging suggestion from you as well. Well, again, for the not set, I think there was a question up top. There's a few articles on Stape. You can just search it by not set. Again, I'm going to include them, of course, in the follow-up to this webinar. But like I said, it's a pretty common problem and should be fixable for sure. I'm using Customer Pixel. I'm using Customer Pixel to enable data layer for Shopify. For Klaviyo SSD, Stape Stack has a feature to set a cookie Stape Klaviyo email, but while using Customer Pixel, it does not set the cookie. Can I set a cookie for Shopify Customer Pixel? Can I do it manually? The reason you can't do it is because the Customer Pixel runs in the sandbox, right? Shopify Pixel API sandbox, and you can't really like set cookies there. So here's a complicated answer to that. Can you manually do that? Yes, you can, but those would be JavaScript set cookies because the only way for you to do it is utilize the same API you're using in customer events to set a cookie client side, right? The proper way to do it is how our app does it. When we're not on checkout in Shopify, although we're using the sandbox, we actually push events to the parent window where everything works as you would expect it. So your server container, including the Klaviyo tag, would also set the cookie properly. So my suggestion would be maybe just try our data layer because like I said, it will be in the parent window, not in the sandbox, and your cookie will be set properly. But if you have some limitations preventing you from doing that, like I said, Google Pixel API Shopify is going to give you some methods to set that cookie right there. But again, this will be JavaScript. You respond to the user ID because is there any way to use Cookie Keeper based on actually logged in user IDs? Well, no, because I mean there is, but the idea behind Cookie Keeper and restoring those cookies it should be happening at all times, right? And the actual logged in user ID would only occur for logged in users, and even then, there will be part of the session which is the most important one, first touch, where we just open things up, right? Where they would not be logged in, so that restoration of the cookie might not occur. But technically, sure, you can expose that user ID to a cookie or a local storage. You apply a corresponding setting in your cookie keeper, the power up on Stape, and you can use that. Essentially, you can use any data point so long as it's exposed in a cookie or a local storage. I have a client with multiple subdomains, each with their own GTM and GE4. Can I use a single sGTM container route request where they need to go? You can absolutely do that. That is more cost efficient. You just need to dynamically handle destinations. And even then, if we're talking GE4, you don't even need to do that because all of that is inherited from the webhits. So the bottom line answer is yes, by all means, do that. What do you think is better, using cookie extender or using custom loader and cookie keeper? Cookie extender is subject to the same limitations that we discussed during the webinar, that visual aid I showed you, right? Your normal sGTM is setting cookies just up to 7 days because it's not in the same network as the website. And we're talking about Safari specifically, of course. So if you use cookie extender, it will be firing in your sGTM container. Effectively, it has the same limitation. It will only extend the cookie, whatever is set in the lifetime. Internally, Safari will dump it after 7 days. So that doesn't help you, which means you want to use the custom loader and cookie keeper for that. And that is done as well. Okay. I think we're good. I mean, I can spend another couple of minutes if you want. Okay, there's more questions. I have pasted custom loaded code in the header of the theme liquid, not use Stape app. Will it work at the same way? Absolutely, it will. It essentially is the same thing. Our app just does that in the background automatically, but you have done that manually, same result. I have 5 more minutes for you guys. If there's more questions, use that. I often use Stape user ID as external ID for many as Facebook Pixel. I don't send a user ID to G4 after the user login. I return the effective user ID, then I send it to G4 and external ID. I don't, I don't see a question there, but like, hey, do that. I mean, why not? As an external ID for media, as Facebook Pixel, I don't send user ID to G4. Simon, no, meta conversion API gateway is not needed when server-side tracking with GTM is set up. That's that's an alternative, right? That's a product for Facebook only, which does server-side tracking without any sGTM, without any coding or anything. So if you run a sGTM setup, gateways are of no sense to you. What if I'm using custom pixel to enable data layer? Will that work? Again, it depends, Assad, it depends on how you're using it. By default, everything you write in that custom pixel, any code you put there, executes in the sandbox. In that sandbox, the normal means to set a cookie are not available. If, however, you make it so that you generate it in that sandbox the way we do, but you push it to the parent window where the normal flow of cookies and everything is available, well, sure, then it will work. So that is answered. Yes, Lewis. So I finally understand. So after the user logs in and return the effective user ID, then I send it to G4 and external ID. Well, that's proper usage. That's the way I suggest. I mean, that's very okay. Okay, I think thanks, Dan. Sorry for approving. Hey, I'm not a native speaker anyway, so that's fine. Don't never apologize for that. I'm using Stape Business Plan for multiple clients. I will provide the server-side service for my clients. So my one Stape container will handle multiple client domains. In Server GTM, I'm differentiating domain tags based on host value, like host SSD. Yes. I mean, I normally use page host name, which would be the host name of the, page where the request originates from. So it would be like example.com. But yeah, you can do lookup tables and you say this host equals this ID, this host equals that label or whatever. You can absolutely do it dynamically. We have tons of containers which run multi-tenant setups. Yeah, no worries. Come again. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up with this. Thanks everybody for the attendance. This has been a lot of fun. Like I said, you're going to get a recording of this and some supporting material early next week. Don't expect it immediately. Need some time to process it. And as usual, if anything, please reach out to our support. Please reach out to Stape. Any questions you have, we're there to help you. So thanks everyone and best of luck. Bye.